Let's say China. 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 I have to have my China. 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 China.
Hello, my friends. Today, we're going to be talking about China. And specifically, the relationship that the global financial superpower, the Rothschilds, has with China and what this relationship could imply. Because you see, there are, I've seen a number of people in this dissident right sphere talking about China as if they are this independent, autonomous competitor or rival to the West and America in particular. And a lot of them like to promote China. They say things like China is more free than the West. They say things like China is against the so-called globo-homo liberalism and stuff of the West. But what if China is controlled by and was actually essentially created, brought up out of medieval feudal poverty to the modern superpower that it is today by the very same international, you-know-who-ish financial superpowers that control the West, that control the U.S., that control Britain, France, Germany, Russia. What if that were the case? What would that mean? How would that change the way that we analyze the situation? Let's take an example of how China is talked about here. I have a video from Keith Woods interviewing Dr. Matthew Raphael Johnson. Let's hear what they have to say.
Countries to really work on their relationship to the point where it's institutionalized. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as I've been saying for at least 10 years now, is one of the most significant organizations on the planet, which is why I've never heard of it before. This is how the relationship between Russia and China are institutionalized, and I actually made peace with India and Pakistan because they're both members. Iran, Central Asia, even Turkey is wondering whether they should join. Not to mention the entire BRICS movement from the Russian point of view, and importantly, the Silk Road. This is a death knell to liberalism. The conception of their relationship from Putin's point of view is that they're two very different places, but unified in the desire to create this multipolar world where you have civilizational, ethnic, and religious foundations for government. Not the U.S. that forces it. Now BlackRock forces everything into the liberal, leftist, secular, feminist universe, which is now they're conditioned for money, they're conditioned for loans, they're conditioned for anything. And these countries are simply doing better. Economically, they're infinitely superior to what's going on in the West right now, without the political correctness, without the violent ideology. And people, someone like me, for example, would be far freer in China than in the U.S. in 2021.
Yeah, I don't think there's even a question of that anymore, especially what we've seen in the last few months.
So there are a number of things that we will talk about here. The first is this portrayal of China as being this civilizational rival, creating a multipolar world through its rise. But like I said, what if this so-called civilizational rival at the very top, behind the scenes, is not only heavily controlled by the same elites that control the West, but was basically created from the ground up by the same elites that control the West. That's number one. Number two is this idea that it's the death knell of liberalism. That the companies like BlackRock in the West that are promoting liberalism only give out their loans or do business on the condition that you're following the global homo ideology. But what if BlackRock and its basically parent company Blackstone also do business in China and are greatly responsible for a lot of economic activity in China? What would that mean? And the last thing about freedom. I mean, that's a whole other conversation, but I find that absurd. I mean, China is one of the biggest totalitarian surveillance states in the world. So to talk about freedom in China or the West is kind of absurd. Nobody's free anywhere because all of these countries are controlled by the same international financial elites. So let's look into how the Rothschilds control China, the history of it, and let's get into some very specific facts here. I found this excellent paper put out by a Czechoslovakian academic, published out of the University of Masarykovka. And here we have an overview in the conclusion that we will explore a bit here. So let's begin. Oh, by the way, the title is The Rothschilds and the PRC, Banking, Financial, and Other Interactions Between the Red Shield Dynasty and Red China. The thesis mapped the chronological development of Rothschild's activities in China, briefly including the period before establishing the PRC. The first documented connection between Rothschilds and China from 1838 predated the founding of the communist state by more than a century. And at that time, the European Jewish family was at its apex as an unrivaled international financial power. In Imperial China, they utilized multiple agents to conduct business with silver and gold bullions, silk, tea, and other commodities, and participated in larger projects involving other actors, such as the Pekin Syndicate. Now, when the Rothschilds, and in fact, essentially a branch of their family, the Sassoons, who were intermarried with the Rothschilds, when they were first entering Chinese markets, China was basically a backwards, technologically backwards, irrelevant backwater in the world. In the 1800s, Europe was just literally like orders of magnitude more advanced in every single possible way than China. They were basically stuck in a medieval feudal system that couldn't compete in any possible way with Europe at that time. And I mean, the Sassoons and the Rothschilds dominated Chinese economy to the point where one specific example is opium. The Sassoons basically had a monopoly over opium, and they got their little dogs, their little bulldogs, the British, to literally fight a war with China to open up opium trade when the Chinese tried to ban opium. And I mean, look at these numbers here. 19,000 troops versus 200,000. 100,000 were mobilized. They were outnumbered 5-1 by the Chinese. and yet they just decimated the Chinese. It wasn't even a contest. I mean, the Chinese were just embarrassed by British superiority, and that was done basically at the beck and call of these international Jewish banking families. So, centuries back, we're looking at already an established stranglehold on the Chinese economy by these international Jewish banking families. And if you think that these dynasties, these banking dynasties, once they get a hold on your country, you really think they're going to let it go that easily? I do not think so. However, after the empire's fall in 1912, and during the turmoil of the warlord era and later Civil War, Rothschilds have, at least publicly, interrupted their activities in the country. Subsequently, they reappeared in the second half of the 20th century, shortly after the PRC was established. Now, this particular essay basically leaves a gap between the Chinese Empire falling in 1912 and the Rothschilds getting involved in Chinese economy again in 1953 after the death of Mao Zedong. But an interesting fact here, which let me see if I could pull it up. Interesting fact is the Sassoon family was still very much in control of China, of the Chinese economy in the 1920s and 30s. This is something I actually find quite funny when you look at this picture. This is a picture in Shanghai. On the left, we see the Sassoon building. And like I said, repeating again, the Sassoons were intermarried with the Rothschilds. You can see them as just a branch of the Rothschilds. Here's the Sassoon family building on the left. And here's the Bank of China building on the right. The Bank of China building, in its original design, was supposed to have 34 floors, which would make it the highest building in the Far East. And think about that, by the way. The 1930s, the highest building in the Far East would only have 34 floors. That even in the 30s, China was backwards. But so it was supposed to have 34 floors, but Victor Sassoon basically told the Bank of China, a government central bank, no. Any house built next to my building is not allowed to be higher than the spire of my building. This is mainstream history. You can look this up. He told the Bank of China, no, you are not going to tower over my building. We are the bosses here. We are in control here. It reminds me of that picture of Mr. Rothschild here. This is the Sassoons poking the Bank of China, telling them, no. You're not going to have a building taller than ours. So even though the article leaves a gap in the early 20th century, there was still definitely activity going on in China in that time. So let's carry on. In 1953, Rothschilds were among the first foreign institutions to re-establish connections with the communist regime after the Korean War, with dealings consisting primarily of gold trading with the Bank of China, supplying the Bank of China with their gold. Rothschilds were basically the kings of the gold market for many years. They owned the mines, they owned the distribution, they set the prices. Then the Cultural Revolution, which took place between 1966 and 1976, basically froze the development of this relationship, with no new publicly available deals signed during this period. And that's important, by the way, the publicly available part, because as this author later mentions, most of the records for the private dealings that the Rothschilds have engaged in are not available. They're not publicly available, and they don't have to be. They're not government records. They're private records, and so that they can do a lot of things behind the scenes without anybody ever knowing. So basically, what you see publicly available, what we have access to, is the tip of the iceberg. Nevertheless, just a year after the death of Mao Zedong in 1977, Sir Evelyn de Rothschild personally visited China from his position as head of the family bank and chairman of The Economist. Subsequently, from 1979 and throughout the 1980s, Rothschilds advised a number of companies, some of which were involved even in the military industry and communications satellites domain. So the Rothschilds helping China build up their military, build up their espionage capabilities. They didn't do it alone. They didn't have the capability to do these things alone. China, as an advanced world superpower today, only got there because of this kind of help. So the question you should be asking yourself is why? Why? If these international financiers who have been the powers behind the thrones and behind governments in the West for hundreds of years now, why would they help build China's capabilities up to this extent if they didn't have control? Ask yourself that. Then, in September of 1996, N.M. Rothschild and Sons Limited signed a memorandum of understanding with the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China to develop a jointly financial advisory business in China and internationally. That proved to be a fruitful decision for both parties and tremendous success in the long term, especially after China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. Now, these memorandum of understandings, where did I, here, this is there isn't much record of the Rothschilds one, but there is one for Goldman Sachs, which, by the way, are also basically in line with the Rothschilds, part of the same you-know-who-ish cast. Goldman Sachs also signed a memorandum of understanding with the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. The same one that the Rothschilds signed a memorandum of understanding with. And this little article on the Goldman Sachs website explains that these memorandums of understanding is far more than just a capital infusion. It's far more than just giving money to them or merging their capital together. It actually underpins a deep strategic collaboration in which Goldman Sachs would advise the bank across 7 key areas: corporate governance, risk management, capital trading, asset management, corporate and investment banking, and non-performing loan management and staff training. So really, these memorandums of understanding are bringing in Goldman Sachs or Rothschild's bank, and giving them basically full strategic control over these banks. That proved to be a fruitful decision. Okay. In the years following the People's Republic of China's accession to the World Trade Organization, Rothschilds started to be openly involved in more and more enterprises, mainly through their renowned financial advisory services, as well as various investment activities, joint ventures with Chinese banks, and many more. Several of these interactions represented cutting-edge deals in their respective fields. Apart from their banking and financial activities, which indeed played a dominant role, Rothschilds participated in numerous other realms such as wine business, weather forecasting, coal and oil industry, or power cord manufacturing. Coal and oil and other mining industries are basically worldwide dominated by the Rothschilds. One of the Rothschilds' prevailing activities in the 21st century is the financial advisory, particularly on mergers and acquisitions. This is important, the mergers and acquisitions here, both domestic and cross-border. The aggregated volume of these deals has clearly reached hundreds of billions of dollars, though the precise sum cannot be estimated, as not all transactions had their detailed records publicly available. I'd say this is just the tip of the iceberg, and we're probably, in reality, talking trillions of dollars. The thesis has demonstrated that Rothschilds helped Chinese enterprises acquire a long list of companies in Europe and the United States, some of which made it to news headlines and were widely discussed. To name just a few, Rothschild & Co. advised on Geely's acquisition of Volvo. Okay, Geely's acquisition of Volvo in 2010, or ChemChina's buyout of Pirelli in 2015. However, one of the most important individual companies in which both sides joined forces is Alibaba Group. Between 2007 and 2014, Rothschild & Co. first helped its B2B division, Alibaba.com, on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Then it advised on acquisitions of several U.S. businesses, and finally acted as sole financial advisor on the group's listing on the New York Stock Exchange in 2014. At that time, this IPO was the most valuable in history at $25 billion. It is no exaggeration to say that Rothschilds significantly helped Chinese companies in their growth and foreign expansion on several continents, while at the same time reaped enormous profits from this cooperation. And now this is let's go back to what Raphael Johnson said here.
Secular feminist universe, religious foundations for government, not the U.S. that forces it. Now BlackRock forces everything into the liberal leftist secular feminist universe.
Okay, BlackRock.
Which is now they're conditioned for money, they're conditioned for loans, they're conditioned for anything.
They're conditioned for anything. They're conditioned for money, loans, anything, is you have to fit into this liberal, feminist, leftist universe. Okay, let's just do a quick search on this article for Blackstone. You might be saying to yourself at this point, Blackstone and BlackRock aren't the same thing. They're not the same thing. Well, they are, basically. I mean, BlackRock is a spin-off of Blackstone. The owners of both of these companies are basically, they might as well be relatives. I wouldn't be surprised if they're relatives. They're both you-know-who-ish. They're both in the same syndicate, the same financial empire. They're not. They work together. They're cooperators. They're not really competitors. Okay, so Blackstone was the original parent company of BlackRock. They're not fighting against each other. And the Blackstone Group, here it says, in a prospectus filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission on June 21st, 2007, the Blackstone Group stated the following, quote, "We have entered into an agreement with an investment vehicle established by the People's Republic of China with respect to its foreign exchange reserve that we refer to as the State Investment Company, pursuant to which we will sell to it 101 million non-voting common units for 3.0 billion. Capital-wise, this made it one of the largest deals in terms of the People's Republic of China's investments in foreign financial companies. Morgan Stanley and Company, Citigroup acted as global coordinators and representatives of the underwriters. Other underwriters included companies such as Credit Suisse Securities, Lehman Brothers, ABN, Amro Rothschild LLC, which held a share of 1,475,000 common units. More importantly, the document further states, "We anticipate that the Right Honorable Brian Mulroney and Lord Nathan Charles Jacob Rothschild will be appointed to the board of directors prior to the consummation of this offering." U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, 2007. Lord Rothschild thus joined the Blackstone's board just on time to oversee its opening phase of collaboration with China. And after this partnership was up and running, he stepped down from the board of directors to join the International Advisory Board. The cooperation proved to bear fruit in time. Between 2012 and 2018, Blackstone and Chinese investors transacted headline-grabbing deals worth a total of $33 billion. I wonder why they chose 33, according to the Real Capital Analytics. This is a great paper, by the way. I'd highly recommend going through it. I'll link it in the description. The Rothschilds have also been involved with the Bank of China directly, Bank of Qingdao, Caracas Ventures, Crate Group, CIIC. They're all over the place in every aspect of Chinese development. That it would have been absolutely impossible for China to have reached the stage of development that they're at without the Rothschilds, without these international you-know-who-ish financial elites. And to imagine that China is like a legitimate autonomous entity fighting for their own civilization, fighting for their national identity, whatever, without some ulterior motive to the national conflicts that we're seeing. Because sure, there is a national conflict between China and Russia and the U.S. and Great Britain, or these, whatever alliances you want to come up with. There are some national conflicts going on at a certain level. But at the higher level, these conflicts are being, in my opinion, staged for a reason, to advance the world in a certain direction. And we can see that at the very top, the same exact powers that are controlling the West also control China, Russia, etc. And if you can admit that the West is controlled by these financial elites, how can you not also admit that China and Russia are controlled by these same financial elites when they have the same powers, they have the same ownership, they have the same influence in China, in the Far East and Eurasia as they do in the West? It's an incredible blind spot that some of these dissident right people have. I don't know why. I don't know why they promote China as being more free. I don't know why they promote China as being some kind of legitimate autonomous rival, when clearly this whole conflict is being staged. The whole conflict is being orchestrated from behind the scenes by the very same people. So, yeah, check this article out, and realize that this is just the tip of the iceberg. So, let's head back to the... Oh, and by the way, just also to mention, it's the same kind of influence, control that as the you-know-who-ish financial elites had in Bolshevik Russia. Bolshevik Russia, Soviet Russia, would have been a backwards technological, impoverished place without support from the same elites that are supporting China today, that are helping China to develop. These things were not done just to make money. They were not done just out of the goodness of their heart or just out of a sense of greed. These international elites know how to run societies, and they have a vision for what they want the world to be like. They're not just out for short-term gains. They're not going to support China or Russia if they think that there's even a chance that these countries could go rogue and actually become opposed to them, actually become a threat to them. I really don't see how they could create these centuries-long dynasties without having an understanding of this kind of a problem. So I believe, it only makes sense that they have control from behind the scenes. So anyway, carrying on with this last section from the article. The research has also shown that to promote their interests in the PRC, Rothschilds have used numerous high-level political and business connections. Important figures, directly or indirectly affiliated with their activities in China, include former German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder, former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, or a member of the U.S. presidential family, Neil Bush. Similarly, family members and representatives of their businesses established connections with people in the upper echelons of Chinese political and economic hierarchy, be it Liu Mingkang, then chairman of China Banking Regulatory Commission, Wang Qishan, then vice premier and current vice president of the PRC, or Jack Ma, former CEO of Alibaba Group. Furthermore, several sources state that Yu Liping, a longtime dealmaker and head of Rothschild Greater China Division, who was behind the firm's many important and groundbreaking transactions, is, in fact, the daughter-in-law of Jiang Zemin, former General Secretary of the CCP and President of the PRC. So the Rothschilds are literally getting their agents intermarried with high political figures in China. The research has thus confirmed the arguments put forward in the introduction, particularly that the Rothschilds, through their prominent position in global financial markets, would also play a non-negligible role in the PRC's banking and financial sphere. Not only that, in many cases, the individual Rothschild businesses were among the first foreign institutions to be involved in the particular domain under consideration. The first. namely the gold trade in the 1950s, financial advisory since the late 1970s, or mutual investments and joint venture enterprises after the new millennium. So this is, the author basically has to clear himself of any conspiratorial angle on this and say, oh, thus it can be said that from the perspective of rational choice theory, both parties found common ground and effectively bridged their conflicting ideological backgrounds to conduct mutually beneficial business. What a load of rubbish there. That's just to sort of wash his hands of any conspiratorial thinking here. However, he continues on and does mention, what is of particular significance is that the Chinese wider public and numerous Chinese businesses and political leaders are predominantly gaining their knowledge about the family from sources that are often referred to as conspiracy theories in the West. In this regard, the most notable source is the Currency Wars series by Song Hongbing, with the first volume published in 2007 by a state-owned publishing house. Isn't that weird? In Currency Wars, Song portrays the Rothschilds as a hidden driving force behind global financial systems and claims, among other things, that the family and its close affiliates are secretly controlling the U.S. Federal Reserve. Therefore, the research has shown that conspiracy theories about the Rothschilds in general are not just a marginal matter in China, but the information so labeled in the West as conspiracy theories in the West, play a crucial influence in shaping the image of this family in the eyes of Chinese people. In addition, a plethora of publicly available materials of this kind focuses specifically on the activities of the Rothschilds in China and the PRC. Scope of these conspiracy theories, ranges from the Rothschilds' historical involvement in the international communist movement and assistance in establishing the PRC, their hidden relations with particular politicians of high ranks, to the overarching plan to make communist China the leading superpower within the so-called New World Order. So some of these Chinese, like Song Hongbing, seems to have a better grasp on reality than these guys, Keith Woods and Dr. Matthew Raphael Johnson. I would argue. We got to get away from these establishment-pushed narratives, these surface-level, blue-pilled narratives. There are no more nations, really, in the world. This is a level of reality that is essentially orchestrated, essentially illusory. Okay? And if we want to really exit the cave, if you really want to see the sun, you have to see the powers behind the scenes. You have to see the world and the nations in the world as basically illusions at this point. And the conflicts, the rivalries, these kinds of things that are happening that are promoted by the mainstream media, these things are essentially theater. And that at the very top, behind the scenes, even China is controlled by the same international clique that's controlling the West. And once you realize that, then you can actually start asking important questions like why? Why is this conflict being manufactured? Why do they want to make China a new leading superpower? Why did they help them develop into a rival for the West? That's what you should be asking yourself. Those are the important questions. That's all I have for today. Thank you guys for watching.